Welcome back. This is the second video of the 11th class for social psychological perspectives on health. In the first video, I talked that social identities are important for our health, and that is because social identities change how we think and how we feel and how we behave. In this video, I will talk more closely in this video, I will talk about how social identities not only change our thoughts, but it would change our beliefs. So a person's moment-to-moment cognitions are shaped by social experiences and availability of social resources. Cognitive behavioral and attachment models argue that the presence of early life negative experiences develop underlying vulnerability to depression. And such underlying vulnerability manifests in maladaptive core beliefs such as I am unlovable or I will always be alone. So these sort of traditional models argue that early life negative experiences determine what kind of beliefs they would have when they are adults. And these models argue that such beliefs, such core beliefs are enduring and stable. So they argue that these beliefs cannot be changed. And in order to change such enduring and stable beliefs, individuals need extensive therapeutic intervention. This is the perspective of cognitive behavioral and attachment models. In contrast, a social identity framework argues that beliefs are fluid, so they can be easily, or not so easily, but relatively easily changed. And beliefs are social. In other words, the meanings of beliefs can be changed by with whom they are. So depending on with whom they are, the beliefs, the meanings of belief can be changed. So it's not enduring or stable across contexts. Instead, they can be changed in each context. And the beliefs are self-relevant. In other words, meanings and importance of beliefs can be changed based on how the self is categorized. So as you may already understand, social identities are all about how individuals categorize themselves. And then according to this framework, beliefs can be changed based on how they categorize themselves. And beliefs can be challenged by social experiences. Social experiences change a person's readiness to categorize oneself in certain ways. So depending not only the early life negative experiences, but depending what kind of social experiences they have in everyday life, the way they categorize themselves would be different. And because the way they categorize themselves are different, the way they think, feel, and behave in each day would be different as well. So let me explain. Let me give you an example of a study. Social experiences change beliefs. So this study was done by Kruvis, Dingo, Honji, Jeten, Owe, and Walter. I hope that is okay. Let me check. Yeah, indeed. I thought I might have the typo here, but this is actually the name of the author. Okay, so the study done by Kruvis and her colleagues. So this is a study with homeless people, and the researchers asked their experience, the experience of homeless people with a charitable association, the Salvation Army, providing the short-term accommodation services. Okay, so this charitable association, which is called the Salvation Army, provides short-term accommodation for the homeless people. And researchers asked these homeless people a set of questions. The first one is social isolation scheme. So this question basically asks how they feel how they feel about themselves. So more specifically, social isolation schema asks items such as I feel on the outside of groups. So basically, this question asks how much they feel that they are socially isolated. Another set of questions concerns with social identification. Example item is I feel strong ties with members of this service. So those who say those who strongly agree with this item means would be considered as high social identification, considered as highly identified with the service. Still another set of question is multiple social groups. Example item is before coming to this service, I was a member of lots of different social groups. So this question asks their prior multiple group memberships. So whether they had many social groups to which they belong. And the last set of question is new group memberships. An example item is since leaving the service, I have become friends with people in one or more new groups. And so those who strongly agree with this item, those are the ones who join new groups after leaving the service. Okay. So this is the figure showing the relation of each variable, showing the results of the relation between each variable. And then, so in this study, they asked the homeless people the questions twice. And then between time 1 and time 2, there were 3 months gap. Okay. And let's look at the figure one by one. So social isolation schema and the number of groups before time 1 is negatively associated, meaning that those who feel socially isolated reported the fewer numbers of groups they belonged before coming to the service. Okay. So these two items are kind of bonding capitals. So those who have high social isolation have lower social bonding, lower bonding capitals. And then those who have many groups that they belong have higher bonding capitals. Okay. And then those who feel socially isolated tend to report lower social identification. So these are negatively related. So if they have high social isolation schema, then they would have lower social identification. And then those who have social identification at time 1 tend to, those who have lower social identification at time 1 tend to report lower number or fewer numbers of groups they belong since time 1. Okay. So these two variables are positively related. So this is like this measure is also more like a bonding capital. Well, this is like a bonding capital, and then from this can be considered as a bridging capital. But from this measure can be considered as bonding capital, and this measure can be considered as bridging capital. Okay, so social isolation scheme at time one predicts how well they can establish identification with the service. So in this sense, social isolation schema is a bonding capital, and then whether they can join a new group, the service provided by the Salvation Army, is considered as whether they would be successfully breach their bonding. Okay. And then those who reported more numbers of groups they belong at time 2 reported lower social isolation schema. Okay, so if they reported fewer numbers of groups they belong, then they would report higher social isolation schema at time 2. Okay, and then also the numbers of groups at time 1, if they belong to more groups, in other words, if they have more bonding capitals, then they would be more successfully develop bridging capitals. So if they have many groups that they belong, they are more likely to belong more groups in the future. And if they belong to more groups in the future, then they are more likely to feel less isolation. Okay. So positive social experiences with members of a charitable association led them to have more social experiences and change their beliefs about the world in positive ways. So this point talks about the positive social experience with members. I think this is related to here. And then have more social experiences, maybe here. And then change their beliefs about the world in positive ways is here. Sorry, this one. Okay. So when they arrive at the service, if they do not feel on the outside of the groups, meaning that if they have positive social experiences with the members of the charitable association, then they would have more social experiences, meaning that they would join more groups. And then by joining more groups, they would change their beliefs about the world in positive ways. Okay. Self-related constructs that used to be considered as fixed, such as attribution, schemas, and negative thinking, are structured by social identity and responsive to social intervention, such as providing people with groups they can belong to. So by providing the service in a way as a group, they can join such group and they can develop a new social identity by identifying with that group. Then they would change their beliefs about the world in the time of only 3 months. Okay. So although in the traditional models, beliefs are considered as enduring and stable, which may not be changed over the lifetime, but social identity models presents that such beliefs can be changed through social experiences in 3 months. Biomedical approach to depression makes people believe that they have the underlying essence to determine the kind of person who they are. This is because biomedical approach argues that people have a certain type of brain that makes them feel sad and lonely. They have a neuroendocrine that makes them feel lonely and sad, and then, which makes them not being able to communicate successfully with others. So biomedical approach instill the belief that they cannot be changed. And they would have a maladaptive belief such as I'm feeling depressed because I'm a depressive person. However, social identity approach helps people from thinking this way. Who they are can be changed by moment to moment and by with whom they categorize themselves together. So in this sense, I believe that social identity approach is more hopeful. This social identity approach makes people believe that they can always change. They can always become different people, different individuals. And by becoming a different individual, they can change how they see the world, and how they communicate with others, and how they can become friends with others. Okay, depression interventions are effective to the extent that they modify social identities or the social realities that inform their social identities. Okay, the effectiveness of cognitive behavioral therapy cannot be attributed to cognitive changes, but rather than to the common factors. The common factors refer to the quality of the relationship between a therapist and patient, the amount of rapport, and the therapeutic alliance. Rapport, I think I mentioned the term in the previous lecture, but the rapport is a quality relationship between therapist and patient. And these factors may be responsible for effectiveness of various kinds of psychological interventions. So regardless of what type of therapies patients go through, there is always a therapist and patient. And then regardless of the strategies they take in the therapy, if there's a quality relationship between therapist and patient, then they would have an effect. Okay. This is an argument that social identity approach makes. So if patient can perceive a therapist as a member of in-group, so in other words, if the patient can categorize themselves and therapist as members of the same group, then they would have effective therapy. So let's look at another example of study. Again, Kruvitz and then her colleagues. Oh yeah. Okay, so this is kind of confusing, but I think the authors are almost identical in these two studies, but these are two different studies. Okay. So people with disadvantage, such as being at risk of homeless, discharged from psychiatric hospital, or being unemployed, were facilitated to join a recreational group of their choice. So basically, researchers provided groups that participants can join. And then they have different types of groups, such as a group which plays soccer, or which enjoys art, which do yoga or sewing. And then also they have different frequency of attendance, or maybe this is an individual difference. So maybe individuals were able to choose how often they attend the group meetings. But these group types or frequency of attendance did not predict depression severity 3 months after joining the groups. In other words, regardless of which group they join, or regardless of how often they attend to the meeting, if they join in the group, then they would improve their depression symptoms. Okay. So instead of group types or frequency of attendance, social identification at time 2 was the strongest predictor. So the stronger they have social identification with their group, the better their symptom was at time 2. Okay. And high social identifiers had a 29.6% chance of being diagnosed as depression, while low identifiers had a 52% chance of being diagnosed as depression. So remember that the participants of this study was being at risk of homeless or discharged from psychiatric. So they basically had a risk of being diagnosed as depression. But just because they joined a group, and then by strongly identifying with such group, the chance of being diagnosed as depression became almost a half of those who was not able to develop strong social identification. Okay. And study 2 of the research also showed similar results. In this study, participants met twice a week, and then in each session they met 3.5 hours, and then they kept this routine for 4 weeks. And then they found that group-based cognitive behavior therapy was effective overall, but the therapy was more effective for high identifiers. Those highly identified with a cognitive behavior therapy group had a 32.6% chance of being diagnosed as depression, while low identifiers had a 50% chance of being diagnosed as depression. Okay. So again, the point here is that not just being a member of a group is not important. Well, it is important, but more importantly, whether they can identify with the group strongly or not predicts better whether they would develop depression or not. Okay. So social environment, not maladaptive cognition, matters. Ways of thinking, feeling, and behaving reflect pathology that resides not within the person, but rather within the social environment. In other words, these manifestations of how they think, feel, and behave are not so much a problem of the mind, but of the social world that structures the mind. So I think in the first chapter or in the first class or in the second class, I mentioned that psychology is determined or influenced by which groups they belong. And this is a sort of a recurring theme of this class, this course. So depending on what kind of world they live in, their mind would be strongly influenced by such situation, by such context. And in this context, social world refers to unemployment, poverty, isolation, and stigma. So if they have these conditions, then you can easily imagine that what kind of thinking, what kind of feeling these people may have. All right. So if people develop some symptoms, like some depressive symptoms, it's not the disease of the individual, but it's rather the disease of the social environment that makes people feel that way. Okay. So preventative interventions prior to depression episodes do not look like traditional healthcare, but require policy change and can be achieved at educational or occupational settings instead of healthcare settings. So the authors of the textbook does not reject the importance of traditional healthcare. It is important to help people who are already diagnosed as depression. But in order to reduce the number of people who will be diagnosed as depression, policy change and educational occupational efforts are needed. Okay. So, social cure involves creating social realities that empower individuals to restructure their own social worlds in ways that are optimal for their health. Okay, so social cure cannot be achieved or cannot be would not be successful if it takes only psychological or social approach. It requires changes in social realities. By changing the social realities, people can change as well. And then by changing social realities, the way people think, feel, and behave would be changed, and then their health condition would be also different. Okay, so the one way to change the social reality is to provide groups that they can belong. Okay, so the conclusion of the chapter. Depression is not just low mood or inactivity, but various symptoms that are caused by belonging, connection, and purpose. So if they cannot belong to groups, or if they do not have sufficient connections, or if they cannot perceive the purpose of their life, then they would develop various symptoms of depression. Okay, so as these are the causes of depression, these causes need to be solved. So they need to belong to groups. And by belonging to groups, they should get connections with others. And then by identifying themselves as a member of group, they can perceive the purpose of their life. Okay. A comprehensive biopsychosocial approach is needed that emphasizes the importance of social factors as much as bio and psycho. Okay, so the intention of the authors here is not to argue that bio or psycho approach is not important, but rather social identity approach should be regarded as much as important as bio and psycho approaches. So an important approach is not to make people not to feel certain ways, like not to feel sad or depressed, but to make people not to live in a world where feelings lonely or sad makes sense. So imagine that if you live in a situation where you have no groups to belong, and because you do not belong to any groups, you do not have any in-group members, meaning that you do not have anyone who would provide you a beneficial social support. How would you feel? Surely you will feel lonely, you will feel sad, you will feel depressed. Is that a problem with you? No. It's a problem of the world that makes you feel that way. So, important approach is to make the world where people can happily belong to groups that they want to. Okay, so this concludes the chapter, and then in the next class, we will move on to chapter 15. And then this is the 11th class. All right, so we have only 2 more classes. And then in the last 2 classes, I will cover chapter 15. Okay, thank you very much.